Dirty Moderates. George Bernard Shaw famously said, "Youth is wasted on the young." And I think these days I can concur with that in a lot of respects, given what I see among the youth in America, their behavior, their politics on college campuses, and a lot of things you've heard me rant about. But all is not lost, because there are still organizations of young, exciting, vibrant people trying to do good work, and trying to prove the center can hold, to use another literary quote here. Our guest today, I think, is a Gen Z dynamo in his own right. His name is William He. His organization is Dream for America. And we found each other on Instagram, and I was taken with him and his organization because I am reading about Gen Z grassroots activism on behalf of the Democratic Party and Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera. Though I'm not a Democrat, I do have sympathies for the Democrats, given the authoritarian threat we face, though that doesn't make me a liberal, a leftist, or happy with the other things they're doing. But that said, I am putting policy misgivings aside yet again this election season, to keep the country sane and to keep the country, I believe, headed in the right direction. William is with us to talk about himself, the organization, and the way I believe he's countering the worst that Gen Z has to offer with the best, giving us hope, right? Am I being too cynical?
No, you're spot on.
Okay. All right. I'm glad. Now, William, before we get into the politics, let's go back to the beginning. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Let's do it.
All right. Well, thanks once again for having me on. Appreciate it. And
Sure.
Earlier you mentioned that you had some policy misgivings, and that's totally all right, because I think in this day and age, right, it's important that people reach out and have conversations. That's the very first sort of barrier to get over all of the nasty division that we have right now. So this is good. But yeah. So to answer your question, right? So let's see. I'm from I would usually say great state of Texas, but I would maybe say interesting state of Texas. But I'm from Texas. I come from immigrant parents, and
Immigrants from where?
From China. And for a lot of my life, I was a very normal person. But, sort of my first foray into politics is, I think, for a lot of young people, too, a sort of a big awakening call right after the Parkland school shootings, sort of just seeing all of the visceral horror and shock value of it. And so right after that, got involved, just did phone banks for March for Our Lives back. What else could 11-year-olds do back then? And for a lot of Gen Zers, right, entering politics was seen as no longer a choice, but a necessity. You saw that with the, March for Our Lives and their big rallies. You see that with the Women's March, with climate change, with all of these other sort of protests and movements. And sort of since then, I've spent a lot of time getting involved in organizing, in coalition building, and getting involved in politics. I was part of, back in 2020, try to organize for Black Lives Matter, supporting, stimulus checks during COVID, worked for different presidential and Senate candidates as a volunteer. I wasn't that high level. It was just, at the local level. And, I also worked on different advocacy projects. I also have a sort of a side project wherein that nonprofit focuses on food security, although it's less sort of in the works now that sort of Dream for America is in the works now. But fast forward to today, there was a need and we answered the call. So that's where we're at. And, and actually just this past fall, actually, well, this is probably unrelated, but I also served as a U.S. Senate page representing Texas in Washington, D.C. for a couple months. Nice. But now we're here.
Right. So I was an intern. I was not a page because I was already in college. I'm from Florida, so I know Parkland well, though I'm from Miami. So Parkland is kind of west and north, of where I grew up. But I remember all the pages running around there. Now, when you're a page, you are basically a page for the state. So, like, for example, I worked, because I used to be a Democrat, for the great Bob Graham of Florida, longtime senator, previously two-term governor, short-lived presidential candidate in 2004, but great guy. And then I worked in the House of Representatives for a guy called Peter Deutsch. He served 6 terms back from 92 to 2004, 2005, something like that. Were you specific to either Cruz or Cornyn, the two senators, or are you just is it like a at large position?
Well, how pages work is I was nominated by Senator Cornyn, and so in any official respect, I represented him in his office in Texas. But day-to-day responsibilities involves, basically working for the entire chamber.
Okay. Where in Texas are you from, William?
I'm in Dallas.
Oh, you're in Dallas. Okay, like Dallas. I was just there last year. We had we have Austin roots, not me, but my producers here at the podcast. So John Cornyn, deeply conservative senator of Texas, probably not as conservative, you might say, as Ted Cruz, but he nominated you. What was it like, before we talk about Dream for America, because I think it's a good segue in, what was it like in that office? What did you think? Because it feels like you went inside the belly of what you might think is the beast. And did you see things differently as a result of that?
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? I think, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I was also the first, I think, Asian American to represent Texas ever in the Page program's history. But I think, on the side of about, going inside the beast, right? I don't see it as a beast, right? It's more of like, seeing how the sausage is made. And I think there's a lot of screaming and yelling out from the outside about, how it works on the inside. And, it's understandable that so many people have so many frustrations about the system, and, it's not working for them and all of that, and that their elected officials are out there to, to get them and to, to punish them. But really, it's very enlightening to see how it all works behind the scenes, because at the end of the day, these are people no different than you or I. They're a lot like your grandparents in a lot of respects. Sure. And, when the cameras turn off, it's a lot like, I guess, how you would expect your grandparents to act at a family reunion. These are just like, they're people no different than you are, who are just trying to do their best and trying to get something done for you and your family, who are just trying their best. And I think it's important because that's a big part of a lot of what we do, right? It's so when we brand ourselves as progressive, it's not necessarily in sort of an activist type of progressive, but in rebranding what it means to be progressive. Because in our view, right, progressivism isn't just a purely, far left ideal. It's something that everybody can and should get behind, right? Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive.
Sure. Bull Moose.
And FDR, of course, was a progressive. But to answer your question, and forgive me, I'm a debate kid, and so, long-winded answers.
No, we like it.
Well, I mean, also a skill that you learn in the Senate, watching speeches all day and night, all the filibusters. But to answer your question, it's very enlightening to see how it all works. And I think I think every young person in America deserves the opportunity to see what it's like, and to see how real legislative and policy discourse happens in this country, because there is a real different perception than what goes on Twitter than what happens in real life. And so it's important for people to understand that. And with that understanding comes greater discourse and greater, because that's one of the biggest things that we face is a huge wave of division and people retreating to their partisan corners. When if you go to Washington, it might look like everybody hates each other, but everybody works together a lot more than you might think.
I wish that I wish what you were doing was more the norm. I hope it is. That's what I want to ask you, because I see just, a radicalized perspective on what people think their role as a citizen is in the United States. If you do, you know what I mean? It's anti-West. It's clearly anti-Israel. Who knew was so anti-Semitic? It's so angry and so focused on power and how to overturn it. It doesn't feel reciprocal. It doesn't feel like, that's not what your country can do, what you can do for your country. It just feels like I'm mad, I'm angry, and we're going to burn it down. What do you say about that?
Well, a couple things. And I think, number one, Twitter is not real life.
Yeah.
Right. I live in a very conservative part of Texas. And so, on an everyday basis too, right, interacting with conservative people, they're not terrible people. they're not
of
terrible
course
people. Not. I know a lot of people on all sides of the spectrum, forward, left, backwards, left, right, all directions. And, I think at the end of the day, we have a lot more in common with each other than we
Yeah.
might think,
Yeah.
right? We all agree that, we want a good economy. We want, to be living in safe communities. We want, all of these very common sense things. We just have different ways to get there. But
Yeah.
that's not a reason for overturning everything that has been done before and trying to, take a sledgehammer at the slightest inconvenience.
Which
And
both the right and the left are doing. I mean, the conservatives aren't supposed to overturn settled institutions. They like that. Well, at least not conservatives. MAGA land likes that. But that's right. I just want to point that out. I'm not just beating up on the left, but the left certainly has this burn it all down. You worked, during the summer of 2020. I mean, if I heard things were literally burned down, but I'm like, burn what down? I mean, what do you mean burn it down? We have the greatest blueprint, not fully realized, but the greatest blueprint I believe ever known of ideas and a founding document, right? That has to be worked on, it has to be nurtured and believed in. That gives us a roadmap for a better country.
That's absolutely right. Right. I mean, the Constitution does bend, but at the end of the day, it will not break. It's actually a quote from House of Cards, I think, which is
I love it. It's a great show. Yeah, the British one or the American one?
I've seen both, but the American one, which is funny because if anybody's watched the show, you'll find it funny. But no, I'm totally with you on all of that. And when we say progressive, right? Obviously, we have center left positions. We advocate and are very strong supporters of the president and the work that he's doing. But it also means a more pragmatic version of progressive, which I think should be the universal definition of progressive. Progressive is not left, right, liberal, conservative. Is about working together to actually make progress on the things that matter to the people all around us, right? Politicians should work together to deliver for families, people coming together to vote on their priorities. That's what progressivism means. Progressivism does not mean taking the most extreme position imaginable and trying to, become an anarchist and try to slash and burn and try to just derail everything that was set up, where you even have a scenario and environment to say what you believe in and to even believe in that. So I'm totally with you. And so
now let me add, this is interesting. You grew up in Texas. Now, again, we can't generalize, but more often than not, the children of immigrants, first generation immigrants, right, tend to be more reverential, I might say, toward the United States, toward its institutions, its structures, its beliefs, even when they're fighting for change, than people that I think grow up here and are used to nothing but their life. They can tweet from the coziness of their bougie coffee shop and call everybody colonizers and stuff like that, even though they've not done jack shit all day, except put their tweets out there and whine. How did your Texas upbringing, right, and being under, governors like Greg Abbott, and of course, you're so informed by the tragedy of Parkland, but then there was Uvalde. How did all that help shape your worldview and ultimately your advocacy?
Well, I've actually, I've been in Texas for most of my life, but I've had the privilege to sort of be all over the map. I went to school for a brief time in Massachusetts. I also went to boarding school in Michigan. But all of the great people who are part of this effort have been telling me, lean into your age. And
Yes.
For a long time, I always thought against that because I wouldn't be able to ride a roller coaster, and so that sort of trauma has stuck with me since I was 6 years old. Don't tell people what your age is. Just But
right. 16 is an amazing age to be as immersed in the world of politics and to be as engaged as you are, and that again, is why I did not know you were 18, but 16. But that's why I loved your looking at what Dream for America is doing. Because I said, wow, you are more than willing to be accommodationist and to be understanding, and most importantly, to listen.
Listening is quite important. We should be doing more of that in politics.
If people like you understand that we always are going to need, even if someone's a Democrat, even if someone is a progressive, how to define that in the most pragmatic way that speaks to the majority of Americans, right? And fundamentally, how about this? Get something done. Right?
Exactly.
So I give you a lot of credit for that, but I want to jump to, I think Joe Biden is incredibly accomplished to that end, a bipartisan infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, lots of stuff. But yet right? I do think age is an issue. Voters say so, and you have to listen to people. This isn't just Republican voters or far left voters. Given all that Biden has accomplished and actually been able to actually kind of make bipartisan headway for what it's worth, getting key Republicans to vote for some of this stuff. Why do you think the Gen Z vote, they seem to be either moving away from Biden or willing to stay home? And I know some of it's related to Israel and their views, and that makes me sick too. But why? What? He was elected in 2020. I mean, he's certainly made huge industrial investments in the country for their future. What's your take on that? I mean, take the temperature. I know you do not reflect everybody. You're not a monolith, but I also know that you also don't reflect the far left sentiment. But what's going on?
Well, right. And being on the ground as a Gen Zer, I can tell you, well, there's a couple of things. I mean, first, we have to acknowledge that polling has been missing the mark, particularly when it comes to younger voters year over year. We saw this in 2022 when the so-called red wave that the pundits and the pollsters and the media insisted was coming never came. Right. And that was because young voters showed up for Democrats and the president's agenda. And certainly there definitely is a divide on a range of issues, but Joe Biden has always been a coalition builder, and young voters are absolutely a key part of that coalition. In fact, polls come and go. It's a roller coaster as always, but recent polls, I think there was one that came out just a couple days ago that suggested that the president has at least a double-digit lead with Trump among young voters. And that's not even factoring the reality that polling often overlooks younger people, because how are polls done? Through landlines, which, you guessed it, are a thing that older people use. And young people are sort of digital warriors. Yes. And the second thing is also what is, in terms of, why this is probably happening. I don't deny that there's a lot of frustration, and I understand it. I see where people are coming from. There might not be enough improvement that meets your idealism in certain areas, right? Whether that be the income inequality or climate change or whatever it might be. But there are a couple of arguments I would have to probably make on behalf of the president. Number one, his age. Yes, he's 81 years old. He's an old guy. He's a sweet grandpa, right? And you might have issues with that. But the caveat to that is that with age also comes experience. Mm-hmm. And why has he been able to get so much done? It's because of his experience, not in spite of it, right? And working together, how to reach out to people, building those relationships, and also just knowing how to govern and to keep us safe from threats internal, at home, and abroad. That's what comes with age. And I think when you're voting for an older person, that's what you're getting. But at the same time, too, it's funny because that's mentioned because the most likely Republican opponent that the president is probably facing is the orange man, Donald Trump. He's not a spring chicken either. He is. He's not that far behind. He's actually only like 2 or 3 years younger. Right. And so it's quite funny that the narrative that the media and all the pundits and so many conservatives and so many young people too also make is that Joe Biden is so old, and yet the alternative is somebody who is just as old and who has shown some signs of cognitive decline as well. And so that's a really stingy point.
I think it is a stingy point, but I would say this, politics, is never linear, tends to always, not even tends, really is an emotional, psychological thing, not a reason-based medium. That's how people vote. They vote emotionally. They vote viscerally. That's why you can tell when a presidential election's happening in a debate who wins a debate. It's a visceral thing. It's not really ultimately who has the better trade policy. People tune out with that. They want to know how you're going to lead. And that's sad too. I wish people were wonkier like I am or you are, but they're not. And this is no defense of Donald Trump, but I think that what makes him such a moving target in terms of getting him, ensuring his defeat, and trust me, I'm committed to that like you are, is crazy reads as vivacious, insane reads as alive. The attributes you've listed for Joe Biden make him steady, right? Make him a stalwart, make him an anchor.
Statesman.
Statesman's a good word. Trump is none of those things, but the reason the age thing doesn't plague him as much is he seems a lot more vital because he's so fucking bananas. Nothing you can do with that as a camp, but it's important to know that because you're working as an ancillary organization, really, or a corollary organization for this reelect. Remember that, the voters are going to have a choice. It's not going to be, well, Trump, they put a Muslim ban. They don't even forget that. They're going to be watching, this like whirling orange dervish in front of them. And they're going to be like head spun. And Joe Biden has to muster up the energy to prove that he's got the energy. Not saying he doesn't, he's got to prove it.
Well, the other thing, if we're talking about vitality, President Biden famously, he works out, he lifts weights, he rides a bike to stay healthy.
Always been trim. Joe has always been trim.
And he's a pretty good looking, thin guy. And over Thanksgiving break, he was actually, as part of his long family tradition, he plunged into 40-degree water as part of the polar plunge. And yet, a lot of people still want people to believe that his health is in rabid danger, whereas, this other guy, this morbidly obese guy who famously eats junk food and doesn't exercise is somehow more full of life than he is. But beyond the sort of, image, I think, by the way, on that point about people voting on emotion, I think emotion's a powerful thing. But if we're also talking about emotion, I think, my personal belief is that people should vote on more with ration. And I'm a very logical and, fact-based.
I'm with you. Listen, I think, yes, voting as a rational, but humans are not rational beings. And because you wonder how, I'm just saying, people tend to vote with their gut, as they say, and not with their noggin. So it's just worth,
But, in terms of emotion, right, we got to talk about who is going to deliver for your family, who is going to keep you safe at night, who is going to make sure that your kids are going to grow up in a country better than it was yesterday, who's going to leave behind something for your kids to even inherit in the first place.
Right.
And that's Joe Biden, right? You've got historic student debt relief, reinvigorating the clean energy economy, cutting child poverty coast to coast, gun reform, pardoning marijuana possession. He's got, a bipartisan infrastructure act, beating big pharma with his $35 insulin cap and bringing back our jobs and factories from overseas. All of that is real important. And look, change and is not, it's going to happen in the instant. Progress is like climbing a mountain. You're not going to get to the peak by transcending gravity and leaping to the top in the blink of an eye.
Well, as somebody who's wary of progress for progress' sake, that's fine by me. Yeah, I think there's virtue in slow and steady incremental change. I do. I think America's prone to it, and that doesn't mean that in our past we should have erased other sins quicker. But with a lot of policies, I think that we should take things under advisement, see what they cost, and see what they're going to do, and not get all caught up in everything's a possibility, because the road to hell sometimes is paved with good intentions.
Right, exactly. Right, I agree. And it's great to be idealistic, to have a vision, to have a big, bold sort of plan for the future, and that's good. There are a lot of issues in this country that have to be addressed, and to accomplish that vision, we got to think about it. We got to take it. So we got to work together. We got to figure out what is best, and it's going to make sure that everybody is brought to the table, and that everybody has a chance to be a part of that success. That's how progress is made.
So with Dream for America, let's talk about that. I know you're 16. You have another not-for-profit that you founded, right? A couple years ago, called Bread for America.
Sure. And that Bread for America is sort of born out of the COVID pandemic. Me and a friend, recognized, it was based back in Boston when I was still going to school over there. We recognized an issue within our community, which was food security after the pandemic. And we thought we could try and do our best to help fill a need. And we spent a couple months on it. We raised, tens of thousands of dollars to deliver, I think it was 10,000 pounds of food to 1,200, working families in Boston in just, I think, 4 months. And all of that is on the power of a completely student-driven team. And all those donations were very grassroots. And so that's basically the TLDR version of it.
Okay. And Dream for America, when was it conceived? How'd you begin to realize it? And I want to know your kind of overall strategic focus for the election year.
So this was conceived about this time last year, after the midterms. A lot of great things was happening that, or I guess ungreat things was happening that year. You had the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Right.
You had young voters, save the Democrats from electoral catastrophe, and a lot of other things. And Turning Point was holding this event, actually. It's called America Fest, which I'll explain a little bit more on what that is in a second. But this whole thing has been in the works for about a year now. We sort of, if you think about this like a presidential campaign, we had like this exploratory committee in the sort of springtime to sort of start putting the building blocks together. And we wanted to press the go button on a very symbolic day that represents sort of all we stand for, which would be July 4th, 2023, which is when we sort of started the marathon here.
Okay.
And the whole premise is offering a progressive alternative to Turning Point USA.
Right.
Now, the work that we do is we're trying to build the most organized, active, and powerful progressive grassroots network, both online and on campuses across the country, to engage young Americans of all backgrounds at all times, not just on the eve of an election.
And I want to just interject here for a second for listeners. So those of us who are not, in the muck and mire of the daily political fights in the world, Turning Point and Charlie Kirk, this is a far right organization. Tell us about, because you're essentially a counterpoint to that. Who are Turning Point, and how are you differentiating yourself? We know you are on the face of it, but give us some information on them.
Yes. So Turning Point USA is what is a far right youth group founded in 2013 by then 18-year-old Charlie Kirk. They're funded by very conservative billionaires, Harlan Crow, the Koch brothers, right, so on and so forth. And the goal of Turning Point USA is to push very radical right-wing politics on high school, college, and university campuses by, in essence, indoctrinating and mobilizing a new generation of young conservatives in every medium, from online content to on-campus organizing. And what's terrifying about them is they've, just this year, over $100 million in all of their partnered organizations. They've got 4,000 chapters across the country. They're a political force to be reckoned with. They, and backed by these millions of dollars in billionaire special interests, they fund all these chapters, not just in universities, by the way, but also in high schools and trade schools and community colleges. And
are they in your high school where you are now?
Fortunately not.
I'm just curious. I don't,
But there, in the area that I live in, there's a lot of them there's probably 3 chapters just, a couple blocks down the road from where I am. And on top of that, they also funnel all this money into campus organizing by wading into student government elections to elect ultra-conservative campus leaders to these positions. On top of that, they've got sort of an annual culmination of their efforts organized around something called America Fest, which is basically this big conference. Trump has been there, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the whole circus has been there. And they draw record crowds of Gen Z and millennial onlookers. Just in 2021, I think they had 10 or 15,000 people come to their event. And they host all these other regional conferences too, targeted towards young women, Hispanics, African Americans. And even more than that, what's really terrifying when you put this into practice, what they're doing is working. You see, for example, in 2022, you'll see that in a lot of areas. For example, in New York City, a very deep blue bastion for Democrats, swung 37 points to the right from 2018. You'll see huge inroads being made with Hispanics and Asian Americans. They swung, 19, 20, 30, 40 points to the right, and a surge that's even more noticeable among younger men, which, by the way, more statistics I'm going to throw at your face right now.
Okay.
Conservative boys, 12th grade boys, are now more conservative than they have ever been before in the last 50 years. And so with all of that is happening, you have Turning Point trying to attempt to reintroduce homophobia, sexism, and white nationalism all back into mainstream discourse.
Why do you think? I want to jump on that because this is important about boys. There's a crisis of boys, crisis of men right now. You've heard it. You've heard it in the worst way from the far right conspiracy theorists, but then you've heard it. Richard Reeves has a book out where he talks about, men are not okay. And there's, calling every man toxically masculine and saying, get lost, you're done is not an answer either, and that's obviously being, overblown by the right into this crisis. 12th grade boys, are they being mobilized against the trans issue, against because there's Christian nationalism is a huge thing that can kind of be biblical with a lot of hate, but still feel biblical. But to be like marching for like right-wing social causes when you're 16 or 17 is more unusual than not. Typically kids tend skew more progressive than they're young, which is of course what Turning Point's trying to counteract. But why do you think that is?
Well, there is no right answer for that one, I think, but there's a lot of factors. For example, let's break it down. So number one, we have probably a big factor is probably social media. If you've ever been on TikTok or on that side of TikTok or Instagram, you have all of these, accounts just trying to uplift figures like Charlie Kirk and Andrew Tate and Ben Shapiro and all these people. And you also have a lot of accounts trying to play into sort of the idea of masculinity. And you have all of these, young people call them edits. So all of these, flashing images, trying to make, very traditionally frowned upon ideals and, characters like Patrick Bateman, for example, in American Psycho, trying to pump them up and make them look really cool.
Generation of psychos in the works. Yeah.
Right. And I think all of that is to the detriment of a lot of young people. That's probably not a popular thing to say that social media is causing a lot of brain rot. But
well, you're right. I mean, it's. Yeah.
I mean, like just the other day, right? You had a lot of young people praising Osama bin Laden.
It's outrageous.
Which is quite concerning. But I think social media is probably a big factor to play into that with a lot of young men sort of trying to, get into that. I think another part of that is just the way that social norms and society and culture has been built.
Right.
Not necessarily by intention, but just the way that it has been playing out the last couple of years. A lot of factors, right? Mental health. Oftentimes, a lot of young boys, their mental health is overlooked because they are told that, it's something that is a stigma, that it shouldn't be talked about, that is not worthy of being discussed. So mental health, and, a lot of young men will feel like there's nobody out there listening to them, that nobody is there to try and help them, which is why the message of Trump and all these people that they are going to be your saviors, that they're going to fix everything with a, flash of a wand is so appealing to a lot of people, because when people are fed up, they have nowhere else to go, the only place that they can go is a bright and flashy thing that is on the edges of society, which is what we call extremism. And you see that repeated throughout history. I've written a lot of, academic papers about, fascism and, for example, World War II. How did Hitler and all of these figures come to be? It's because a large swath of the population felt ignored by their government, by their officials, by their representatives, by people in media and culture, that they felt really that they had nowhere else to go. And there comes this strong man that says they can fix everything and make your life a utopia. And that sounds like a really appealing message in the moment, but it's important to resist. So that's basically a long-winded answer to tell you that I would probably blame it on social media, mental health being overlooked, and just a lot of young men feeling like they don't have anywhere to go. And so when you have, all these different sort of extreme figures pop up and say, all right, you got to be masculine, hitting women is okay. You got to assert your dominance. You got to do this and you got to do that. Government should, work for men and, patriarchy, hoorah. And, it appeals to a lot of young guys that are feeling lost in this world.
It's so interesting. I always joke with my friends. I came out when I was 20. I was an undergrad at that time at NYU. And then I went to grad school at Brown. I was well out of the closet then. And, even though I was met with a lot of love and support, still the 90s, very different time. And I think about, the world, but, you have this environment that's trying to let people be themselves. Would you say where you are now that some of this Charlie Kirk behavior, this messaging, this stuff is part of the conversation? Like, are kids feeling comfortable where you go to come out and be gay and be trans, or is it just too conservative where you are, or does that not matter? Is it not about that? I'm just fascinated about, we know Gen Z attitudes are incredibly enlightening on sexuality, thank God, gender and things like that. But what's it like at your school now? Like, do you have gay friends? What's it like?
Yeah, I've got a lot
obviously you do, but open people, it's okay.
I would say as a whole, just Gen Z is in general, and I think is generally pretty accepting of people in the community, and that's a great thing.
Even conservative Gen Z probably.
Even conservative, because so some of my lifelong best friends they're conservative, and
yeah. So that's it. No, I'm asking specifically because it seems like the Turning Point organization would make that a focus. Young men becoming gay, and trans, and all this stuff. All that crazy conspiracy stuff that they traffic in.
right. But I also think because it's not just isolated young boys who are joining the ranks of Turning Point. It's interesting because a lot of young women are also part of Turning Point as well. Right. And this messaging is a lot more generalized and works for Turning Point than the sort of isolating targeting teen boys. They try to present themselves as, a lot of times on campus, as sort of this nonpartisan, centrist, third way organization. Oftentimes they'll have these signs that say Democrat, Republican, awake, and
What's that mean? What's that mean? Awake, not woke?
I don't know. Which actually, I would challenge anybody who's conservative to tell me, what does woke mean? Can you tell me what woke means?
Well, but also when they say awake, is that their play on woke? What does that mean, awake? I mean,
I believe it's they're trying to play on woke. That they're informed, they're engaged, they're educated, they distrust the media, the institutions, and they love America. That's what they're playing on, and so the whole idea of Turning Point is that, which is the other thing too, because when we say we want to rebrand progressivism, it also means for Democrats and for liberals to take back some of the values that conservatives have basically put a monopoly on, and that's religion and patriotism. Yep. Those are not exclusively conservative values, right? Because Turning Point's whole pitch is that if you love America, then you're a conservative.
Well, listen, I will say this in the general sense, and this has nothing to, and this is not about the youth, but this is about people, slightly older than you and certainly older than me. There is I think Trump helped exacerbate it, but certainly in my lifetime, there has been a move away from youngish people believing that family and patriotism are important, because, social movements, social justice movements long before the ones we're living through now were, about women's lib and gay rights and things that kind of challenged some of those notions. And those went hand in hand with a more traditionally progressive politics. But I always wear my patriotism proudly because I don't want it reclaimed or claimed by lunatics like Charlie Kirk, but I also wear it to tell people on the far left who just have this stick up their ass about America being the worst place, though they've never lived anywhere as good as America in their whole life. They wouldn't last 5 seconds in a dictatorship, a real dictatorship. I think it's important too. So all of this is to say, I like that. What I like is, I of course, like you're doing the issues, but family and patriotism and virtue, things that, you're right, shouldn't be owned by any ideological side, but should also specifically be embraced by the progressive Democrats, left, because that's how you appeal to people, because people want something to believe in, and they believe in America despite our faults, and they long for improvement. And like you said, we're all people, sit around the dining room table, want our kids to be safe, or our lovers, friends, parents to be safe, and make sure they're not shot up in school and have health care. There's a lot we agree on, but when people start saying, and again, social media blows us up, but down with the West and down with Israel and down with America, and you see it on elite college campuses, that's not a good look. It's horrible, number one, but it's also a very damaging message that becomes a cultural red herring, right? It becomes a thing that then you're out there being a great surrogate for President Biden and his investments, let's say, in climate, green energy, and being competitive with China with chips and science, right? But you can't talk about that because some asshole has come out and said America is the most evil nation in the world, and that's all Fox sees. Yeah, but here's the thing. You can't blame the right-wing ecosystem totally. I was on Fox News for a long time, for a year. You can't totally blame them, and I'm going to tell you why. Because sometimes the left just hands it to them. It serves it up. You know what I mean? Like, not that people should have a right to say what they want, but there is this emphasis of people being like, well, I don't feel comfortable being patriotic. And, Trump was the president. So someone wrote an article in the New York Times, preposterous. I see an American flag and I think of racism. Oh, that's ridiculous. You're seeding, C-E-D-E, ing. You're ceding that symbol to Trumpism. Come on. That's where I'm going. And I think so the values stuff, I think, is so important. Also merit, William. We got to move away from dividing people into group upon group upon group upon group. You know what I mean? That is not the way we get out of this. We still have to believe people are people. It doesn't mean people aren't facing discrimination, but your whole world, can't be, I'm William, I'm Asian. I'm not Adam, I'm gay. Your world has to be, I'm an American, and here are the things I believe in. And I hope these values accord with liberty and freedom and things that we supposedly espouse as a country, right?
I agree. And I think that is sort of the whole thesis of what our values entail. Right. That's the country we aspire to. And the other thing for a lot of, because I think for a lot of young people too is, and there's probably maybe something for the president to work on as well, right? Big reason why Democrats have lost a lot of working class voters, a lot of people in rural America is sort of an unintentional maybe slippage from those values. And I think it's time to once again more strongly embracing those sort of values. And I think in trying to, young people need to understand that, America has its faults. We are not perfect. Democracy is not perfect. And, certainly our best days are still ahead of us. But at the end of the day, we live in a great country. We have everything that we need. There's a lot of people who still don't, and we need to work on that. We need to fix that. But we have an immense amount of privilege to speak our mind, to have the freedom to pursue what we want, to try to aspire to our own version of the American dream, which that's why it's called Dream for America. It's about aspiring to something better. It is aspirational. It's idealistic. And it's about instilling in young people a newer sense of patriotism, a new brand of progressivism that liberal, conservative, independent, everybody can get behind.
So Dream for America, what's your strategic plan insofar as you can share it with us going into 24?
The plan has always been the same, even if it was an election year. Our sort of focus is on 3 C's: chapters, creators, and conferences. That's sort of the whole plank of what we do, right? Organizing on the ground, having those conversations on campus, and trying to get young people involved in this sort of new brand of progressive ideas that we want to have people support, right? Creators, right? Having a really robust social media presence. In fact, just this month, I think we hit 50 million social media impressions, which is really terrible because our Instagram was, suspended for totally bogus reasons. But and conferences, which eventually we want to host sort of conferences on the same level and host those events just as Turning Point does to rally and mobilize young people. And going into 2024, right? One of the metrics I just mentioned, right? Millions of impressions, right? It's just share the exact messages that we were talking about, right? It often, for at least for a lot of people, feels like Democrats and the Biden administration are not just up against Republicans, but a media ecosystem that holds the president to maybe a double standard.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I was not letting the conservative ecosystem off the hook. I was just saying their messaging is so tight. Your counter message or your message, and however you want to look at it, the Democrats' message has to be tight. Joe Biden came out in 2020, did a great thing because he showed who Joe Biden was. He said 2 things. I'm not a socialist, so stop saying it. I remember this. And defund the police is bananas. So cut the crap. We're not doing that. That this year has to, which he's doing. I am pro-Israel and I'm not going to support a terrorist organization. And I am also whatever the other, just put these issues to bed. Just because young people scream about them or crazy people doesn't mean they're right. And the majority of the country that elected Joe Biden, that moderate middle, that's the vote that's up for grabs. I'm an independent voter. I'm a registered independent. Okay. So I can't a Biden-Trump race. Where am I going? I'm not going anywhere else. But, Biden versus someone else depends on who this someone else is. Biden's got to say to me, here's why I want you to vote for me. But I want to ask you this, because this has been a robust interview, and I love it. And I love what you guys are doing. So 2 questions. Who is your favorite president, and why are you a Democrat?
Why am I a Democrat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Both. And who is your favorite president in history? Come on, Grover Cleveland. No, I'm joking.
Millard Fillmore. No.
Millard. Okay, better one. Better.
Let's see here. I'd probably have to go with Franklin Roosevelt. I mean, firstly, viscerally, as a disabled person, to be elected president 4 times and to get so much done is a feat for the triumph of the human will. That, despite our limitations, right? If you believe in it, if you want it enough, if you think it's the right thing to do, anything is possible. It's always impossible until it's done. And the second thing, it's always impossible until it's done. This man has done so much good for this country.
Yes.
It is unbelievable.
Absolutely. Best president. Lincoln's my favorite president, but FDR, best of the 20th century, for sure.
Hands down. World War II.
World War II. I was going to say, and this is good. I haven't had this guy in the show, but I'm going to give you a treat. It's a 3-part series. Look at this book. So you're going to love it. You ever heard of Mantle of Command?
I've not had the chance to read it.
This book about FDR at war, okay, three parts, not only proves why he was the best. America, to have him at the helm when we did. Winston Churchill deserves a lot of credit for sounding the alarms about Hitler, but a lot of American military maneuvering, some of the best, what to do to thwart the Germans by fighting them in Africa and all this stuff. A lot of it had to do with Roosevelt's genius. So you'll love this book if you love Roosevelt. The author is Nigel Hamilton. It's 3-part series. Such a read. Read it maybe over the holidays when you don't have anything to do because you can't put the damn book down. I'm telling you. I've read the first 2. I haven't read the third. But good answer. Does FDR's legacy sort of naturally make you a Democrat because you feel like that's the kind of country you want to live in?
I think so, because the Democratic Party has always, the Democratic Party has always been, I wouldn't say always, but for the greater part of recent history and for the 20th century, technically not before that, technically speaking, because of the Civil War. Right. But the Democratic Party has, for the most part, always been a bastion of, what it means to be a good American. And what I mean by that, essentially, is that, instilling, because FDR, JFK, right, LBJ, Hubert Humphrey, all of these great figures in Democratic Party history, right? These were the sort of dynamos of the party. And they're the ideal representation for what we have accomplished and what we still can accomplish. Because, I truly believe that our best days are not behind us. There is no need to make America great again. America's great, but we have a responsibility to make it even greater so that everybody is extended the olive branch and extended an opportunity to make it in this country. And that all of that is an amalgamation of, me being part of an immigrant family, my upbringing, and just my intrinsic, personality and belief that America is good. We have a long way still to go. We can get even better. And I think returning to the values and the whole concept and, feel of what the Democratic Party was under Roosevelt and JFK and all of these great people, it's not only a winning electoral strategy, America will be better for it. And so that's why I'm a Democrat.
I love it. Now, William, before I let you go, how can people get involved, support you? First, tell them where to find you, but how can people, help you build your movement?
A lot of ways to get involved. The easiest way to get involved is to sign up on our email list on our website and donate whatever you can.
What's that? Tell everybody what that is.
So that website is dream4america.org. And on that website, you can find everything about us, a very detailed sort of pamphlet about what Turning Point USA is, what we're doing, how we're doing it, all of the issues that we believe in, the people we endorse, and the list goes down from there. So the easiest way to get involved is to sign up to join our email list and to contribute whatever you can. In fact, just over the last 48 hours, we raised over, $30,000 just on the backs of, trying to get back on social media and telling people that this is something that we're doing. Right. We've seen a really great response to it. And I think it's a really potent message. The bigger national audience that we have, the faster it's going to grow. The other ways to get involved is if you're a student, if you're a college kid, you're a high school kid, right? Get involved, start a chapter, join our team. The more hands on this, the better, because this is not about me. Frankly, my role in this is really just to build something that can survive without me. The American dream is quite a hard thing for a lot of people to achieve nowadays, but I think everybody should have the opportunity to do so.
Well, you're 16 and you're going on infinity, I guess, because of your accomplishments right now. But I also wanted to say, and I mean this, you give me hope for America. So you should be really proud of what you're doing. And I say that with an open heart. I don't mean it in any patronizing way. I think it's fantastic what you're doing. In any way Dirty Monitor can help you, we will. Okay?
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
William He of Dream for America. Folks, thank you for listening to this Gen Z Dynamo. More great stuff coming your way, as you know. In the meantime, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.